Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Nightmare Press podcast, episode 7. Today, my guest is Todd Sullivan. He was the first signee of Nightmare Press way back when, and he's been with us ever since. Even when we went away for a while, he stayed with us. So, how you doing, Todd? Thank you for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, Jacob. This is actually the first time we've talked. So
Yeah,
yeah, thanks for inviting me.
yeah. It's always been through email and Messenger most of the time.
Right.
So, for those of you who don't know, Todd is the author of the vampire series of extreme horror. Book one was Butchers. Book two is The Gray Man of Smoke and Shadows. And he also did an anthology for us. So I guess let's go ahead and kick this off by having you just tell us a little bit about the vampire series of extreme horror.
Right. So it's a funny thing because the Vampire Says Extreme Horror is essentially about having a very bad job, which is why the vampires in the stories are called employees. They're actually never referred to as vampires. And that's what I was trying to do. I was trying to write uh, like normally speaking, when you read a lot of vampire fiction, because there's so much of it out there. Like funny enough, I just finished watching. I didn't finish watching. I stopped midway through this movie called Abigail, which is on Netflix. It's also a vampire story. But a lot of times when you see vampire fiction, particularly modern vampire fiction, you kind of a lot of people empathize with the vampire and they want to like be a vampire and things like this. And so when I was thinking about the my own vampire, my own take on the vampire, I actually wanted to write more of an old school type vampire because in the past, vampires were not something people wanted to be. They were actually kind of considered damned, and so that's what I was going for. I was kind of going for more of a damned type vampire. And yeah, someone stuck in a job that they simply cannot get out of is as damned as you can get. So yeah, that's what the idea for the series came from.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's one of the things when you submitted it to us that I really noticed about it that I liked was that it didn't go with. And I'm not one of those people who hates on the modern vampire stories. I know it's like a lot of people like to hate on Twilight, but it's whatever. I don't hate it, but I liked that they were just a different breed of vampire. Like it wasn't just the aristocratic vampires, and they weren't just all like like Dracula. They were a bunch of badasses. They were pretty ruthless. And I think that's really what made it fun. But you also put a very relatable aspect into the stories about, like you said, the bad job and people not wanting to be stuck under those rules because essentially it's an organization of vampires that monitors and polices all other vampires. Correct?
Right. The organization is called in Korean it's called the Gwanlo. And that's what they do. They basically like micromanagers. Whoever's had a job before and had like a micromanager above them will understand how the vampires feel. And so they just have to they're constantly being watched, constantly being corrected, constantly being threatened with punishment for not fulfilling kind of rules that can sometimes be quite vague and opaque. And yeah, so that's what we're trying going for more of a corporate, I guess a corporate style vampire series.
Yeah, it's kind of like the everyday feeling of the people who who hate the corporate jobs, corporate. I guess can't say corporate America per se because your book's set in Korea, but yeah, I found that pretty relatable. And in the vampires or in the Gray Man of Smoke and Shadows, it gets a lot more um, personal per se for one of the characters, and I thought that when a lot of people don't interject that personal life and feeling for the vampires into their stories as much these days, and I thought that was a nice aspect of that too because it gave you something to invest in more than just the vampires ripping each other apart and ripping humans apart and all that stuff. So I thought, so what kind of made you want to go that route?
So when I did Butchers, um, a lot of people who reviewed the book thought that the standout character was Hateri. And I feel that when you do things, you never waste what seems to be like I guess the kind of the gym diamond, whatever you're doing. I think so many people liked Harry because she really wasn't she wasn't supposed to be the focus of the first book. It was supposed to be Sammy, really, who was the
Mhm.
focus. But since so many people really enjoy Harry, I was like, well, I might as well make the next book more about her. And yeah, I mean, she's actually based on a student that I met. It's been a long time now, like 13 years ago, and their stories are actually kind of similar, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, I chose that route because of the in Butchers, Harry was just the most seemed to be the character that when people reviewed it, her name is the one that came up as the one that people really enjoy, her characterization.
Yeah, she was definitely. I think she kind of, yeah, her characters kind of stole the show, but I think it was because even I think it's just her kind of rogue approach and just kind of her overall personality that was really sort of captured readers. And I think you gave her a perfect backstory for that personality. Um, but so I was going to ask you what inspired her, but you already answered that. So you mentioned a student. So tell us about your teachings in Korea. What it is you do.
Well, I teach English here. English is second language here in Korea. And I've been here for 16 years. And yeah, I mean, I've taught by now all of the country. So I started off in a small little place on an island called Jeju-shi. And then on Jeju-shi, I was in the southernmost tip of the island called Sagipo. And I went from there all the way up to as far north in South Korea as you can go before you enter North Korea.
Mhm.
And I've taught just about every age group since I've been here. Since I've been here, so yeah, that's what I do. I teach English as a second language. Right now, I'm teaching quite young kids, but I've taught university students. I've taught elementary, middle, high school students, and I've also taught adults. And then for 2 years, I was in Taiwan during the COVID years, where I also taught.
Oh, that's probably makes for a lot of interesting experiences. So, like outside of Hiri, what other sort of inspiration? Because obviously the vampire series is steeped in the Korean culture. So, what are some aspects about living over there? Some experience, whether it's with the students or just being in the country and experiencing their culture, that really brought the life to the vampire series.
When I was writing this, let's see, it's been 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 to 10 years ago. This is like a time I actually don't go out very much anymore, but at that time I was really like Korea has a very very vibrant nightlife, and I was going out to a lot of bars and clubs and things like that. And so in the series, well, in the two books, there are a lot of bars and clubs involved in where the characters go, and also just the kind of grind of working in Korea, which is where the whole bad job aspect comes in. It really is a very it can be a very stressful place to work for Koreans and foreigners too, but for Koreans. And so just taking the kind of the nightlife of like places like Seoul and then Jeju-shi, which is where the kind of the biggest city on Jeju, and then plus the kind of stressful nature of uh, employment in Korea by itself. Those two things were the biggest aspirations for those books. And I mean, definitely some of the characters are based upon people that I kind of met. Like there's a scene in The Great Man Smoking Shadows, which deals with the stone carvers here in Korea. I mean, that's a very big deal. There's a lot of mountains here and a lot of there's a place where you get rocks from, which is the name of it I'm forgetting right now. So there's a lot of that in Korea. And so a friend of mine took me to his mother's father. And his mother's father, in his yard, just one day started collecting rocks. And over the years, he built these really big stone replicas of different things around the world. And that shows up in the Gray Man Smoking Shadows. I mean, that's what the family of one of the characters. That's what the family of one of the characters does. They're one of the stone carvers here in Korea. There's like mysticism thrown into it. So I mean, I take inspiration from just everything, just these kind of things I experience here, I kind of keep them in mind, and eventually they come out through some type of fiction.
Yeah, and that was the Great Man. Like when I read Butchers, I was like, this really is kind of, like I said, it was different and it kind of took the vampire thing to a different level. But then when I read The Gray Man and Smoking Shadows, I thought you expanded that world so much with just touching on different types of creatures. And that Stone Man was one of my favorites. It was almost like it was like a golem essentially.
Mm.
But yeah, I think I noticed that nightlife. You really capture that nightlife really well, and anytime I've made a promotional ad for your books, I always try to use that sort of background because I felt like it caught that essence. So I think in a lot of ways, do you feel like the underlying thing about the bad job and it's just, do you think there's any sort of personal feelings in these books, like maybe not that you don't like your job, but like you experience that through other people, like just kind of seeing every day around, or maybe feeling that stress of being in that environment?
Uh, stress is a very important cultural aspect of Korea. Funny enough, and I don't think anyone really comes and works here and doesn't get exposed to the type of stress Koreans kind of put on themselves. It's just there's almost like this kind of idea here that if you're not stressed out, you're not really working.
Mm,
And so it doesn't really matter how productive something like a employer can be. But I mean, if they just kind of seem kind of cool and relaxed, then that's kind of almost seen as like a bad thing, or like they're really just kind of wasting time. So it's really important, like whether or not the stress is necessary, it's still put upon you. So yeah, I mean, my jobs here are definitely stressful because it's just the culture here. That's just the way it works here. So yeah, I mean, in that way, I guess it is personal, but it's not just me. I mean, it's just really a nationwide aspect of Korean culture, which is, I mean, I guess if you want to want to justify it a bit, I mean, my father was here. He actually was drafted and fought in the Korean War, I suppose, maybe 60 years ago. And I mean, they were extremely poor back then. And they went from being extremely poor to, one of the more wealthy countries in the world. And you can't say that about every country in the world. A
mm.
lot of them are still poor. And so, whether or not, I mean, I suppose that could be a justification for the intense amount of stress they put on each other. But I mean, it's definitely a grind. I mean, yeah, it's definitely a grind, and that's where that aspect of the book comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to really get things done, sometimes you have to really put it all out there. So I can kind of understand. They kind of have that. The culture's not as extreme as far as being stressed out over here, but there is that stigma that if you're not like, if you're relaxed or you're laid back, then you're like lazy or something, over here. But and it's funny that you mentioned that because you just seem like such a laid back fellow. I guess you gotten so used to all the the stressfulness. You've been over there for 16 years. I guess it's easy on you. You don't real you gotten used to it, right?
I have. I'm very zen about it. I have gotten used to it. And then I do a lot of exercise. I do a lot of biking. I do a martial arts here. I do a lot of stretching. So yeah, I mean, there's ways to deal with stress, but I am relatively relaxed as I go about my life 16 years later here in Korea.
Yeah, I noticed. I've seen you. You mentioned the martial arts. I've seen you post things about that in the past. I imagine that had a little bit to do with the with some of the fight scenes in the books. What is your martial arts background, and kind of how does that influence your writing?
So when I was in America, I guess the first martial arts that I did, if you want to call it martial arts, is fencing. I did fencing for about 5 years in Atlanta, Georgia. And after that, I did JKD, Muay Thai, and a bit of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu and Capoeira for only a year. I mean, I did a lot for that year, but it was only a year. But then after I came to Korea, I started doing this martial arts called Gumdo, which is Kendo. It's more easy pronounced, so I just keep saying Kendo from now on, which came from Japan. And definitely, it's a really hardcore martial arts. It's very realistic. The way the tournaments and competitions go, and the way the matches go. And yeah, they employ a lot of that within the two books. I mean, there's a lot of sword fighting going on, and there's a lot of combat going on. And I think the martial arts gives me an idea I've never been real like genuine combat. It gives me an idea of what genuine combat would feel like, and kind of the thought process, the pacing of strikes and counterattacks and things like that. So yeah, I definitely use the martial arts I've had. It's been for Kindle, I've been doing it for 15 years, but definitely gives me an idea of I think of how to make a fight combat scene work on the page.
Yeah, and if nothing else, it helps you with the stress, right?
Right, it does. It is. It's a good way to relieve stress. Going in there and with these bamboo swords and competing against each other. It's a good way to relieve stress.
Yeah, just banging swords to one another, just
Right.
get all that aggression out.
Right.
Um,
Definitely so.
the so what was your initial attraction to vampires?
That's why I know as a kid. I mean, that's it's a funny thing because I teach kids, and just for some reason, some kids have a huge like I mean, I'm talking about kids who are like 6, 7 years old. For some reason, have a huge fascination with a vampire, with the vampire mythology. Like they'll just mention it, like when they're doing their own little art or their own little writing thing. They just write about vampires, and so wherever I don't know what it is about the vampire, but it's just extremely compelling to people, even from that young age. And that was me. Just my brothers who are all older than me have different types of vampire books on the bookshelf, and of course, I use the things that they use, and it was just always something that was extremely attractive to me. So I was writing vampire stories as a child, and then I tried to write my first vampire novel when I was in high school called Night Shadow. And honestly, that book uh, really certain ideas from that book continue on into the series that exists now. But yeah, it's just I don't know where it comes from, but it was just definitely there from an early age.
Do you ever try to like take maybe look at certain recurring tropes in the vampire genre, so to speak, and try to change them, and like ever think about like maybe ways to make that different, or to maybe splice some of the older vampire mythology with like some of the Korean type mythology that you've learned about over the years, just to make a different character, a different story?
Yeah, that's what I was mentioning in the beginning. Funny enough, like when people finish reading my series, I don't really want them to think, "Man, I really wish I could be a vampire." That's actually not what I want them to think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that when people read Twilight or they read Anne Rice's the vampire book, Vampire Chronicles or something like that,
Mhm.
or when they watch a lot of movies like I don't know, like even Abigail, which I just kind of watched half of, or like different movies.
The Lost
Vampires tend
Boys.
to be yeah, the Lost Boys, definitely like the Lost Boys. Vampires tend to be things that people want to be. I mean, there's like a vampire communities all around the world.
Mhm.
But again, I was trying to go for the aspect of how vampires were seen in the past, which is I think you don't want to become because you are now this monster who preys on humans, and if you have a conscience and you have like humanity, that's actually what you don't want to be. And so that's what I was going for. I was trying to go for at the end of the book. I mean, I want people to enjoy it, of course, and have a good time reading it.
Right.
But I
Yeah.
actually didn't want people to think, "Wow, I really wish I could be an employee in this organization of vampires." That's actually the opposite of what I was going for. So I think that's how I was trying to break the more modern mode by having something that you could sympathize with and you could kind of empathize with, but you don't want to become it, I suppose.
Yeah, kind of like a Clive Barker approach, where he's like the monsters. You come to understand the monsters, but you still realize they're monsters, right? That's something I kind of picked up on that too, reading when I was reading your books. And yeah, I think what you say about not wanting to be a vampire is it's very different from the styles, like you said, Twilight and Lost Boys. Because you think back, like if you read Dracula or you watch the Nosferatu movie from the 20s, there's nothing glorious about those vampires. I mean, the old movie with Bela Lugosi, he kind of has an air about him that's kind of seems sublime. But I mean, you're very much aware that he's a bad person, and even the Nosferatu. He just looks horrendous. So I mean, yeah, I think that's important because people lose sight. I've always wondered why people want to be vampires. It's kind of like how people idolize Freddy Krueger. It's like you're not supposed to like these individuals, or these creatures. So I think that was pretty cool. Um, so like at one point we did the Vampire Connoisseur with you as the head of the anthology. When you were picking those stories, what were you kind of looking for? Were you looking for stories that painted vampires up like those kind of monsters, or just kind of different narratives, or what?
One of I write for people to enjoy themselves, to be honest. I'm not really trying to write a book that people feel like they have to struggle to get through. And that's the same thing that I look for when I read something. I just look for something that people, when I was going through those, and there was a lot of them too. There were really a lot of submissions for that anthology.
Yeah.
The first thing that separated the ones that were definitely a rejection from the ones that were maybe is whether or not I could get through an entire story in one setting. And if I could do that, then that's a really good sign because I'm pretty busy. I have a lot of things that I'm doing. I'm going through all these stories, and so if I could get through the entire story in one seating, then that's a really good sign. And honestly, I was just looking for stories that entertain me. And I basically chose the ones that I thought were the most entertaining. It wasn't easy actually because there really were a lot of good stories in there. But yeah, I mean, I look for writing to be entertaining, something to kind of take people away. And that's how I chose the stories for the Vampire Connoisseur.
Yeah, I think a lot of people lose sight of that sometimes. That reading is at its core. I mean, it's an art form, but it's also an entertaining aspect. And I think sometimes people feel like they try too hard to write something, and they don't really have to write it. They could just be natural and write it and enjoy it. So you ended up picking a lot of good stories. I know that. I can't remember all of them now off the top of my head, but it did turn out being a very good anthology.
Cool.
Uh, so you mentioned to me not too long ago that you were possibly working on another vampire series of extreme horror book. Is that still going on, or?
Yeah, it's in its I guess its final first draft stages. It actually got big. It is 94,000 words, but it shouldn't
Yeah.
get any longer than that. Um, and it's a complicated it's a complicated is kind of a loaded word, but there are a lot going on in this. It really does explore this life. Like in this book, I really want people to walk away feeling like they have lived the life of one of these characters. Like they really have walked in their shoes, which is why it got kind of so big as it did. So yeah, I mean, I'm in the process of doing the final version of the first draft of this novel, and it's called A Soul a Day.
Yeah, I do remember you telling me you wanted it to try. You wanted it to be longer because that was one of the criticisms that the recurring criticisms for your other two books was people, which I told you. I said, well, that's actually a good criticism to an extent when they say they wanted more. So that means you did something right. But yeah, I mean, I remember you mentioning that, and people saying that. I wish there was more. So at least, hey, you know what? You drew them in, so maybe they'll be ready for this one. So.
Hopefully so. I probably wouldn't write many more novellas because of that criticism, because it is actually a consistent criticism of the novellas that I have out. And so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I always do try to. I always have my mind more on novel than novella these days. It just takes a lot longer.
Yeah, it does. I've always struggled to write shorter stuff. Like I can't write short stories very well at all. I don't know why, but like when I when I wrote a couple of books that I wrote before, they all ended up being over 300 pages long. But it's like
Mm.
it's not just it's just there's just so much that I see going on in my mind. So of course, then I wrote one that's really short, but I don't know. It's just weird. So I think writing shorter stories like novellas, and especially the short story, and getting people interested is it's definitely a hell of an art form that's hard to get down pat. So you did well with that. So.
Thanks.
So let's talk a little bit about the Windshine Chronicles. You want to tell our watchers about that?
Yeah, I mean, this one's actually the Windshine Chronicles is out through Mocha Memoir Press, and so I wrote these books more or less at the same time. Like Butchers and Hollow Man were more or less written at the same time. I mean, I forget which one I finished first, but I think I finished one, and then immediately started the other. And then The Great Man Smoking Shadows and There Will Be One was basically written at the same time. And if you look at the publishing date, they came out around the same time too.
Yeah.
And so, like, if Butchers is about having a very bad job for the rest of your life, um, the Windshine Chronicles is actually about chasing your dreams and finally getting out of that cycle of having to work bad jobs and becoming this thing you had always dreamed of becoming. And that's because they go on the characters in the series go on these quests, and the ones who are the most successful and the ones who survive are considered to be heroes after a series of quests. And these people are basically like, with the equivalent of like the top author or the top sports player or the top what have you, in society. And so they actually are two sides of the same coin. One is about what happens, I suppose, if you chase your dreams and you don't get that. Another one's what happens is if you chase your dreams and you do get that. So yeah, I mean they're basically two sides of the same coin, I suppose.
Yeah, and those are fantasy, right?
Yeah, those are fantasy.
Kind of like a high fantasy or low fantasy kind of deal.
It's not high fantasy, no. I mean, something that the people who have reviewed this say is that they feel like it could take place in the real world. It's very realistic. There are fantasy elements in it, but it's very realistic written fiction.
Yeah, so it's kind of on that low fantasy end where it can take place in our world, sort of deal, which
Right.
is I think is a it's a genre that needs more attention. Like I'm a big high fantasy fan, but it's everywhere, right? And it has been for 50 years, ever since the Lord of the Rings pop books came out. But I think I enjoy like when fantastic elements like that are placed in our world, or some call it magical realism. They're different, but they're kind of on that same coin. So yeah, I think that's definitely cool. Now, how many books do you have in the Windshine Chronicles?
So for that, it's two novellas and one novel.
Oh, there's only one. Did
Right.
you? Yeah, okay. I thought you had more than one. Sorry, I guess I failed in doing my research there.
Well,
Um,
it's three altogether. It's three, but it's two novellas and one novel.
okay, so there you go. It's all together. Okay, yeah. I thought there was more than one. Has that one finished, or are you going to do any more with that one?
So I started the fourth book, but I wanted to finish some other things first. Um, like I wanted to finish this vampire book first, and then funny enough, I teach a lot of kids, and I think the next book I would write is I'm gonna try to write a YA novel. So that's really what I have my eye on next. But I don't know, I haven't written YA before. I've been writing short stories, but nothing that's become very long, and so I've been thinking about that for the past few months.
Yeah, because I know that because yeah, obviously the vampire series of extreme horror is called that for a reason. It gets ultra violent in points. I'm assuming the Windshine Chronicles probably doesn't carry that extreme element as in the same sense, does it?
No, in fact, the Windshine Chronicles, particularly the second book, is technically YA fiction because it stays in one point of view, and that person is like 16 years old. So technically, that is YA fiction. But the first book and the third book, even though I kind of think of it as YA fiction because of the subject matter,
Mhm.
because I do think that a lot of times, to be honest, as younger kids who have that belief they can really achieve their dreams. I think that that type of mentality belongs more with teenagers than it does, honestly, for adults.
Yeah.
But the problem is that both the Hollow Man and Blood Stew the point of view switches. And so sometimes it's a young person who's the main focus of the story, but then sometimes it's like a adult. And so for that reason, technically it's not YA. Those two books are not YA fiction.
So that kind of keeps the overall arc from being YA, since that kind of breaks it up. So yeah,
Right.
I think what I think that was I think your idea here for the YA story is really interesting. Um, what drew you to the more extreme aspects of like the vampires of the extreme? Are you a fan of extreme horror, or was it just the fact that they were vampires and you feel like that was more fitting for vampires that you were trying to create?
No, funny enough, I'm actually not a huge fan of horror. I don't really read a lot of horror books or watch a lot of horror movies. Um, but I did feel that, and honestly, some of the reviewers have said that the three books, or the two books, are not really horror. There are some. There's a lot of violence in them, and then in Butchers, there's one scene that has from the reviewers who had a negative reaction, that one scene is the one that did it, which is why I first put the extreme horror label on it. But yeah, I mean, I do think that when you have like vampires who can sustain massive amount of damage but still survive, like it's not like it's killing them, but they still go on. I feel like because of the amount of violence that it takes in order to kill a vampire, like I mean, just say like they were zombies. You don't just stab a zombie. You have to really destroy a zombie in order to get rid of it. And the same thing with vampires. And for that reason, that extreme violence that it takes to honestly kill them is why I kind of felt that the extreme horror aspect of it, or the extreme violent maybe is a better way of putting it, aspect of it is just appropriate because you can't kill them in a simple way. They're not human. So that's why that's more extremely violent.
Yeah, and that's the thing I liked about, because honestly, I'm not like a huge fan of horror either. Like I didn't read a lot of it until I kind of started mingling with some of the other horror authors, and I've just never been a huge fan of it myself. I like a lot of older movies. I'm more like in line with like I like supernatural horror, which is more like dark fantasy, right? And I feel like that the butchers kind of fall in, and the other one, the Gray Man's, they fall kind of in a dark fantasy type category. And I think it was Stephen King even who said that that kind of horror really is just fantasy, and that's what I like about, like, you didn't go over the top with the extreme violence. Like there wasn't this, oh, I think this would be cool and it has nothing to do with the story, so I'm just going to write about someone getting their rectum ripped out or something by someone's teeth, like, just, but it all fit into the story, and I think you did that really well, and that was another thing I enjoyed about it. So, all right. So I was also going to ask you, do you have this short story collection called the Ship-Shaping Priestess of the Thousand-Year War? That was something you had talked to me about once. Is that something you're still interested in working on at some point, or tell us a little bit about that one?
So the shape shifting Priestess of the Thousand-Year War um, actually took place in the same narrative universe as uh, the Windshine Chronicles. And honestly, I actually took pieces of that, and that was going to be part of what was book four for the Windshine Chronicles. So unfortunately, that's really no longer possible because I'm actually going to expand those characters and to be more fully into the world of the Windshine Chronicles. So yeah, actually, that particular one is really being saved for something else now.
Yeah, I definitely get that. I think there was a lot of potential in that. I know I had the same instance with a novella. The one novella slash short story collection that I published actually began with a short story somebody was going to publish, and then that I thought of ways to make it better, but it would have exceeded their word limit. So then they put that anthology on hold, and I was kind of like, hey, can I just have the story back? I just kind of did it on my own. So sometimes that stuff works out. And that's like I said, it's hard for me to do short stories because I always want to do more with them. So I definitely understand what you're saying. So that would be cool. So that's going to be part of the fourth Windshine Chronicle book.
Right. The antagonist, protagonist in that particular book is really the focus of the fourth book in the Windshine Chronicles.
Okay, great. I guess we'll keep that a secret then, right? You won't talk too much about that one.
Right.
Okay, so this you started a magazine too. You want to tell us about that?
Yeah, hold on a second. Yeah, so this magazine is called Samjoko, and it started technically it started about 8 years ago. I was teaching at this tutoring place, and it was mostly focused upon fiction writing. And I was trying to my students. I wanted to collect the best writing that they did during the time I was there, and put it into like a collection. And that collection I called Samjoko, and this is like probably 8 years ago. And it's just like like a thin little pamphlet. It wasn't anything much. It was like maybe 50 pages. And it had like a cover image and things like that. But the students really enjoyed it when they got it because, it's always really cool to see your work kind of bound nicely and, you can actually hold on to it. And then fast forward after I came back from Taiwan. So this is 5 years ago. And I decided that I was going to start a small little publishing magazine, digital magazine. And when I was thinking of a name, at first I was like, well, maybe I should use Samjoko again. But then I was like, well, maybe I should like just try to do something new. I really like the idea of Samjoko. Like it means the three-legged crow here in Asia. It's a very popular symbol in Japan, China, and Korea, and maybe Taiwan and Thailand too. And I thought, it's just such a really cool symbol, and it's like a cool name actually. So I decided to run with that, and I've been doing it now for 3 years. I think it's beginning of the fourth year, and it comes out. Once every season, so it comes out 4 times a year.
That's cool. Have you managed to get a lot of students interested in writing their own stuff through this?
No, not through this, no. But I mean, I do think that, particularly those students that taught a long time, that in that particular academy, a lot of them were really good writers. Well, they were really interested in writing, and they put a lot of their effort into it. So I think I definitely had an effect upon that group of students. It's been it's been a long time. They're probably quite old now, but I do think I had an effect upon those students.
Well, that's cool. It's always good to be inspirational to get other people to want to express their art. Some people are really afraid to even try, and it's always good to have someone there to sort of be like, "Hey, yeah, go ahead and do that. Here's this. I did it, or this person did it. Why can't you?" So, so let's tell us, how did you end up in Korea?
After so what happened was that when I went to my MFA in Queens College in New York, in the winter semester, it's a 2-year program, and I guess in the winter semester of that program, I was able to go to Japan, to Tokyo, for about 3 weeks, I believe it was. And when I went there, I knew that I wanted to come back to. Actually, I just wanted to go back to Tokyo. And so when I was about to graduate from my MFA, I was looking for work, and I started putting out my resume to recruiters who were so they could get you a job in Japan. But at that time, there was a president in Korea who wanted a native English teacher, which is what I'm called, a native English teacher, in every school, so elementary, middle, and high school in Korea. And so they were just hiring. As a result, they were hiring a massive amount of foreign teachers, English teachers, to come here. And the recruiter who I was working with said that maybe they could get me a job in Japan. They could definitely get me a job in Korea. I mean, that would just be no problem. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up in Korea. Actually, I didn't know anything about the country at the time. I'm not even sure I knew the capital at the time. And I just kind of, it's a job that I got. It was in Asia, so it was close to Japan. So I was like, okay. And I came here, and I've been here, except for that 2-year break in Taiwan. I've been here for 14 years.
What kind of was there some somewhat of a culture shock when you went there since you didn't know anything about it? And how was it hard to adjust to it, or was it pretty simple to get into?
I wouldn't say it was simple. No, I mean definitely. See, it's a little bit weird because just like in America, if you want to, like, let's say you're coming from like Korea or China or Mexico or wherever, if you want to, you can actually spend all your time amongst people who are like Mexican or Korean or Chinese. It's the same way here. I mean, if you want to, you could come here. And so when I first came here, there is like the expat community, and it makes the transition here a lot easier because everyone's speaking English, so it's not like you have like a big language barrier. And it's just a bunch of Westerners. There's people from America, Canada, Australia, places in Europe, and so in that way, it was like a cushion when you first come here. I mean, it takes getting used to. Korea is a place that takes getting used to.
Yeah, I know. There's like with Japan, I know that there's a lot of certain culture things you don't want to disrespect, and they take that very seriously there. Did you run into a lot of that the same way with Korea? Something that you had to learn the hard way, or did you just kind of like, since you had those expats there to tell you, were they kind of there to say, hey, don't do this, or did any of them play jokes on you, said, hey, do this, and then you get in trouble?
So a guy who became a very good friend of mine is from England. He's actually older than I am by maybe 8 years. I was 31 when I came to Korea, and he was probably like 39. And again, he's from England. And this was probably the third or fourth week, maybe I was in Korea. And we were walking. We were going out to, I think we were going to like a duck restaurant, maybe. I forgot where we were going. We were going out to a restaurant. And there was like this, like where we live in Jeju, it's like a big fishing community. And the fishermen look very rugged. I mean, I guess that's just the best way I can explain it. So
I think that's everywhere. Yeah, I think that's everywhere. Fishermen are just rugged anyway. They got to be.
Right. They look very rugged. You know them when you see them, right?
Right.
So he's walking towards us, and me and my friend are walking towards him. Of course, we're coming in the same direction. And the fisherman, as we're passing, spits at our feet. Now, I actually didn't think anything of it at the time because I just didn't realize that this was like I didn't realize what that meant. But when the fisherman did that, my friend, the guy from England, immediately spit at his feet. And that guy, the fisherman, went berserk. I mean, he started cursing and yelling and screaming. And at the time, I had no clue what happened. Like, I had missed the whole spit exchange. So I just wasn't really looking for it.
Yeah.
And afterwards, like my friend's like, oh, just keep walking on, just keep walking. And so he just kept walking. And then he explained it to me. Like, he had heard that in Korea, when you spit at someone's feet, it's an insult. And the Koreans are always doing it to foreigners. Well, not all Koreans, of course. I shouldn't say it that way. But some Koreans would do it to foreigners, just kind of like insult them without them knowing about it. Mm-hmm. But he had heard that this was an insult, but he wanted to test it because, of course, in the Western world, this is not really an insult. And this is why he did it that way. He waited until someone spit at his feet, they immediately spit at their feet to see what the effect would be. It was a very big effect. It really is an insult here. And so that was one of the things that, one of the things that I learned in my like third or fourth week. Don't spit at people's feet. And when people do it to you, that's their way of actually insulting you, because it's actually supposed to be a really bad insult here.
I get, maybe you should work that into your story. That's how a fight breaks out. So I spit at someone's feet.
I'm gonna write a memoir one day. I'm pretty sure I'm gonna write a memoir one day. I don't know when, but eventually I will.
That'd probably be pretty interesting, considering that you came from America, went over there and spent all this time in Korea teaching. And it's not like you were a recluse, right? You're over there dealing with people because you're teaching students, and I'm sure there's a lot of interesting stories, not only from that, but just meeting expats from other cultures, not just America. So, yeah, I bet that would be a pretty interesting read for sure.
Right.
So, well, if when was like, okay, so I guess it kind of seems like there's always that group. No matter what country you go to, there's always going to be the group that doesn't like foreigners, right? That they don't want them there. But what differences do you see? Like, I mean, I'm sure there's tons, but like cultural differences between Korea and America, maybe that you like better over there, and then maybe some that you like better over here?
Hmm. I mean, there's a pretty big fitness culture to I think Asia in general, and so that's pretty cool. I mean, they are throughout Korea. There are small little free. Um, let's put it this way. So there are like all this exercise equipment that's outside that you can
Mhm.
use freely. So there's like there's weights. There are different just anyway, exercise equipment that you would normally find in a gym, but it's free and it's really all over the country. It's really quite common, and you see people using them all the time. And since I'm very big into to exercise, then I find that to be pretty cool. I ride my bike here, and there are just so many people who ride their bike in Korea, which you don't see quite as often in America. There are bikers in America too,
Yeah.
but yeah, here there's just a lot of a very big biking culture. There's also a very big martial arts culture, of course. So yeah, I mean, there's a health consciousness here that that maybe isn't as robust in America. Though it is there, of course, in America, but maybe not as robust.
It's a little more, I wouldn't call it niche here in America, but it's not quite as, I guess, mainstream. It's weird because here in America, like people who, it's almost like some people make fun of the fitness culture here in America. And I'm just like, why would you make fun of people who are trying to get in shape? Doesn't really make sense. But you mentioned like the free exercise equipment. That kind of just makes me, not to get too political or anything, but just what's the difference between like the economic like mindset over there versus our capitalist mindset over here?
Hmm. I, I I I don't think there's much difference. I mean, I think that people here are very much into. Well, I know that they're very much into being very fashionable, having nice cars. It's not really different. I mean, they're very much into well money and fashion and stats and things like that. So it's really not much different.
Yeah, I feel like that's kind of the free world, the free industrialized world anyway. Like everybody likes having nice things, right? At least if nothing else, having stuff they need or stuff that's cool. Um, so, I don't know, is there anything else that you'd like to talk about or plug or anything that might be forthcoming that we haven't already discussed?
I'm actually again, I'm very happy to finally talk to you. It's been I guess it was right before I went to Taiwan that Butcher was going to come out, so it's been at least 5 years. And yeah, I'm glad you're up again and Nightmare Press is rolling again. I've seen your pictures. You guys are doing a lot of book signings again. So yeah, I mean, I think it's just it's been cool talking to you. I couldn't really see you because of the screen, but it was
Yeah,
nice talking to you.
yeah, that's the thing with Nightmare Press, and I'm glad you stuck around. Um, the thing with Nightmare Press is like just all that personal stuff went on, plus COVID didn't help, so we had to go
Mm.
under. But we put out, I think, so far this year, 7 new books, and that was after about 3 or 4 months of submission calls. But we got a lot more coming up, so I want to do it right. But it's kind of like what we were talking about before with like the horror thing, like. Even when it started, I didn't want the same old people who are getting published by everyone else. I didn't want all just like the crazy horror that was going on. So like when people like you and like Joseph and a few of the and Becky, when they all submitted to me, it was kind of like, yeah, this is cool. These are people that haven't gotten in because it was kind of always like a friendship thing, right? And that a lot of that in that circle. But since then, like I've kind of wanted to even move away from horror, and we've got a lot of like sci-fi and fantasy stuff, and even looking at some more literary quality and bizarre thing like surrealism. So I'm hoping to really continue expanding. A lot of people have been interested in what we're doing, and again, I always tell people, I was like, well, we started with one of the most intriguing vampire stories that I'd ever read about. This guy named Todd. You should check it out. It's called Butchers, and I always try to point people in that direction. So, have you found that you've enjoyed a lot of the feedback you've gotten from those stories?
I have. I think that overwhelmingly people were very interested in the narratives, and yeah, I mean, for those who have read it, I do think that it was, you know, mostly positive, mostly positive. The ones who were detracted normally just point out to the violence, and you know, it's extreme horror, so that is what it is.
Yeah. No, I did notice too. You got the attention, through that book. You and I, and whatever, we were able to get a lot of attention from like people who are more readers and not just insiders, reading each other's books. So that was one of the things I was really glad to see. And hopefully, if your next book, if you're still willing to stick with us, hopefully we'll be able to do more with it, because it looks like it's, we're getting a little bit more noticeable. So, and but yeah, I'm glad to have finally gotten to talk to you. Just we've corresponded through text for many years, and thank you for coming on the show. And you know, good luck with everything that you're working on, and hopefully we'll continue to work together.
All right, cool, and have a good. I think it's what is day for you, morning. So have a good day.
Yeah, it's early morning for me. You're ready to go to bed, right?
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah, I won't keep you up any longer then. All right,
All
talk to
right,
you later, Todd.
all right, bye.
Bye.